The movie starts in an apartment where a man is working while listening to the radio. Suddenly, he hears loud screams from the next room. It sounds like someone is attacking his neighbor. Soon, we see a man kill a woman in her apartment. After the crime, he turns on the TV for a moment and then quickly runs away. Later, the woman's neighbor comes home and calls out to her. When she doesn't answer, he gets worried and calls the police. A police officer arrives, enters her room, and is shocked to see her dead body. She has no clothes on, and someone has strangled her. The officer is horrified and quickly calls his team for help. Then, the movie takes us back to 3 years earlier, to when the killer first started killing women. It was 1962, and we meet a reporter named Loretta. She lived happily with her husband and their 3 children. Her husband loved her a lot. Loretta was very interested in crime cases and wanted to solve them. When she went to work, she asked her editor if she could report on crime stories. But he refused, saying she was too new and didn't have enough experience. Instead, he gave her product reviews to write, thinking she wouldn't be able to solve crimes. But Loretta didn't give up. She collected and read many crime reports to learn more. One day, she read about a woman who was strangled to death. As she kept reading, she noticed that many women had been killed in the same way. While thinking about this, she saw a woman named Jane sitting at a nearby desk, wearing a nurse's uniform. She asked about her, and someone told her that Jane was working undercover for a nursing home story. Later, Loretta visited her mother and brought some groceries. As she was leaving, her mother told her to lock the door properly. Loretta asked why she was being so careful. Her mother said that a woman in the neighborhood had been murdered just the day before. She was so scared that she was installing extra locks to keep strangers out. Loretta was shocked and decided to visit the crime scene. She thought it might be the same killer from the report she had read. The next day, she gathered all the crime reports and went to her editor. She told him that she believed the same person was behind all 3 murders. She explained that people weren't paying attention, and that's why the killer was still free. She said the news should be on the front page to warn everyone. The editor agreed with her point but reminded her that she had no experience. She argued that she would never get experience if she never got a chance. Finally, the editor let her work on the case. She was very happy because this was her first real crime story.
I'll do it on my own time.
All right.
Loretta then met the man who had found the murdered woman and called the police. She asked him how he discovered the body. He told her that the killer had probably broken in, tied the woman to a chair, and tied up her legs. He also shared something shocking: the killer had put a candle between her legs. When he found her, she was in that horrible condition. Hearing this, Loretta was disgusted. She couldn't believe someone could do something so cruel.
There was a broom handle stuck between her legs. I got a gift.
She told her editor, and he advised her to check the autopsy report for more details. Following his advice, she went to the hospital to see the reports. When she opened the files and looked at the pictures, she became very angry. The killer had murdered the woman in a very brutal way. Later, she looked for the officers working on the case and went to a bar to meet one of them. She asked him about the stockings found on the victim. The officer said that the killer had placed the stockings on the woman's body as if he were decorating a gift. After this, she went to a telephone booth and told her editor what she had learned. Then, she returned to her office and wrote an article about the case for the front page.
3 shadowy patterns of attack.
Nice work, kid.
The next day, while she was at home, her husband read the newspaper and told her that her article was so good that there was no space left for other news. Everyone was talking about it, and she was becoming famous. The commissioner visits the editor and asks him to stop publishing reports about the case, saying it is creating panic. The editor defends Loretta's work, insisting they have strong evidence. But the commissioner refuses, saying the police have no proof that a single killer is responsible. At home, Loretta is so focused on work that she ignores her family. Her sister-in-law, feeling unwanted, decides to leave. Loretta realizes this too late and feels upset. The next morning, an elderly woman returns home with groceries while a man follows her. He pretends to be a plumber checking the pipes. When she lets him in, he kills her. Meanwhile, Loretta is serving breakfast when she gets a call about another murder. She rushes to the office, where the editor assigns her and Jean, another reporter, to work together. Since the police aren't making progress, they must investigate themselves. They find out that the victim's cousin, Alan, discovered the body. Jean calls various clubs to gather information about him. The next day, they publish the full details, calling the killer Phantom. The public panics, realizing the murderer is still out there. The police struggle to catch him, and the next morning, reporters bombard the commissioner with questions. Meanwhile, the killer enters another apartment, tricking a woman into letting him in. At the same time, police and reporters investigate a nearby crime scene. A detective confirms that the murder follows the same pattern as the previous cases. Loretta keeps working, and soon, the editor decides to publish photos of her and Jean to highlight their efforts. Their families start to worry, fearing the killer might target them. They receive many letters from people urging them to catch the murderer. The killer is now called the Boston Strangler. Months pass, but the murders continue. One night, Loretta receives a call about another brutal killing. This time, the victim is a young girl. She rushes to the scene, though her husband worries for her safety. There, a woman tells the police she saw a man outside her apartment who knocked on her door, claiming to be a painter. She refused to let him in, saying her husband was home. The man got scared and left, but before going, he told her she was beautiful and should become a model. She describes him as a tall, well-built white man. The investigation intensifies, but there are still no solid leads. One night, Loretta receives a silent phone call from the killer. He keeps calling, harassing her, until her terrified husband smashes the phone in frustration. The next day, Loretta and Jean attend the latest victim's funeral, where Jean asks a detective if there are any leads. He tells her the killer is too careful, leaving no evidence. That night, another woman is murdered after trusting a man posing as a radio repairman. Fear spreads across the city. The victim, 24-year-old Patricia, was a secretary. Jean retrieves her autopsy report and learns from a receptionist that Patricia was having an affair with her married boss, Mr. Nelson. Meanwhile, Loretta visits another victim's mother, learning she was a churchgoer. Loretta visits the church and discovers that Patricia's ex-boyfriend, Daniel, had been blackmailing her. Loretta and Jean confront Daniel, but his behavior makes them uneasy. They report everything to the detective, leading to Mr. Nelson's arrest. However, tests prove he isn't the murderer, and Daniel is cleared too. The case stalls, and Loretta's husband grows frustrated, reminding her that she's neglecting their family. The next day, another murder occurs, and a suspect, Paul Dassey, is arrested after confessing. The detective tells Loretta this is their first lead before the Boston police. Her editor suspects a copycat, as the original killer only targeted women in Boston. That night, while caring for her sick daughter, Loretta sees a man outside and panics. Locking the house, she finds a letter slipped under the door. Inside are photos of her and Jean, marked in red. She warns Jean, and they demand their pictures be removed from the newspaper to protect their families. Days later, a detective secretly meets Loretta, revealing that Boston police have kept them in the dark. He shares critical information: Albert DeSalvo has been arrested. DeSalvo, a dangerous offender with multiple rape charges, becomes the prime suspect. Loretta investigates his case and finds a woman's testimony about how he entered her home but fled when she resisted. She insists he is the real killer, but the detective hesitates, noting that a witness named Sophie claimed DeSalvo was in jail during recent murders. However, they discover DeSalvo had been released on bail for a few days, coinciding with Sophie's murder. Shocked, they suspect he is the true Boston Strangler. The police place DeSalvo in a cell with George Nasser, who was actually the man Sophie identified. Loretta realizes the man who came to her house was Nasser, not DeSalvo. As media attention grows, a writer begins a film about DeSalvo and interviews him in prison. Before its release, the court restricts public access to the interview. Meanwhile, DeSalvo hires a powerful lawyer and secures a book deal, making a fortune off his crimes. The case weakens, and authorities rush to close it. But Loretta refuses to accept it. She believes DeSalvo isn't the real killer. Then, another murder occurs in Michigan, identical to the Boston Strangler's pattern. A detective informs Loretta about a sixth victim, and she immediately travels there. While reviewing case files, she spots a newspaper photo of Daniel, whom she had met in Boston. The Michigan detective confirms Daniel is their prime suspect. Loretta calls Jean for help. Jean visits a mental hospital where Daniel had stayed and finds that he had shared a ward with Albert DeSalvo. Stunned, she informs the police, who arrest Daniel Marsh. However, he refuses to speak. Loretta then confronts the writer making the movie. He reveals he's being paid a massive sum for the story and no longer has the interview recordings. Later, Loretta receives tapes from the detective. As she listens, she discovers the shocking truth: DeSalvo's confession was manipulated. The writer fed him details about the murders, which is why the court rejected it as solid evidence. Jean listens to the tapes and realizes DeSalvo is innocent. However, the authorities are determined to frame him to close the case. Loretta, unwilling to let it go, visits DeSalvo's brother and tells him she knows the real story. The next day, DeSalvo's brother visits him in jail to discuss the case. Meanwhile, Robert calls Loretta, asking what she wants. She warns him that she has proof he's lying and can stop his book from being published. Robert agrees to meet her the next day to reveal why DeSalvo confessed. That night, inside the prison, another inmate overhears DeSalvo's conversation. Later, while he's in his cell, the prisoner sneaks up and fatally stabs him. The next day, Loretta is shocked to hear about DeSalvo's murder. When she visits the prison, officials claim he was killed over drugs, but the explanation doesn't add up. A woman secretly hands Loretta a note with an address. Following the lead, she meets Harrison, a former mental hospital patient. He reveals that DeSalvo, Daniel, and Arthur had fabricated their confessions together. Their lawyer convinced DeSalvo that admitting to the murders would make him famous and secure a book deal for his family. However, none of them ever received the promised money. Loretta confronts Daniel, asking if he killed Sophie. He denies killing anyone but refuses to give straight answers, deliberately confusing her. He suggests that DeSalvo might not have been the real killer and that multiple murderers could have been involved, each following the same pattern to mislead investigators. This revelation hits Loretta. There was never just one killer. Multiple murderers operated across different cities, making it seem like the work of a single strangler. She shares her findings with her editor and publishes her final article, changing the headline from Strangler to Stranglers. That night, she visits Jean, and they celebrate her breakthrough. The film ends with details about Loretta's life. She was an exceptional investigative reporter, but her dedication to work led to her divorce. Despite this, she continued working on similar cases and remained close friends with Jean. DeSalvo was never officially charged with the murders and spent the rest of his life in prison. A later investigation confirmed he was responsible for one of the 13 murders, but the remaining 12 remained unsolved.
Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.